occasions to share that narrative globally. But let me tell you, there's a lot of innovation that's taking place in South and Southeast Asia. And I want to talk a bit about the innovations that are really going to benefit women and a lot of people that are excluded from traditional financial models. So since 2014, we set up this membership association. We are meant to serve the global fintech community that's based in the UK. So when we were set up, we had 54 what we call founding members. And we came together to produce an industry body that will basically bring all of the key stakeholders together in our community. Everyone from the startups to the big banks, the policymaker, the important NGOs of the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation, together to promote programs, to promote policies, to attract the interest of the media so we could advance this multi-billion-pound sector further, and ultimately to improve the existing financial services sector for good. At the heart of what we're trying to achieve, in addition to being obviously collaborators and bringing communities together, is also to promote financial inclusion. So this is still a humongous problem that's being faced globally. There's about 2.5 billion people that are unbanked, so completely without any access to traditional financial services. And this is a problem that's blighting not just the developing world, as you know, but also the developed world. We have 2 million in the UK that is unbanked, which is quite depressing given that we have the largest financial services sector in the world. But off the back of that, we also have a lot of innovators that are trying to solve the problem of unbanked. And unbanked is a women's issue because over 1 billion of these unbanked people are women. We have 600 million people, as Rashida pointed out, over 600 million people in Southeast Asia. Only 27% have bank accounts and are part of the traditional financial services model, which means over 400 million have no access to traditional banking. So it is a women's issue. So, interestingly, last year, the UK government went to Southeast Asia to promote trade, and they brought a fintech delegation with them. Part of the fintech delegation was our chairman from Innovate Finance, and basically David Cameron announced that he was going to sign £750 million worth of trade investments and to promote fintech globally, because we have a lot of innovations that are trying to enhance financial services and financial inclusion. But I thought that was a bit arrogant because there's so much happening in Southeast Asia that perhaps they don't need the help of UK fintech innovators. Now I wanted to talk a bit about some of the innovations that are really transforming the lives of people in Southeast Asia, and also helping what I think is really at the heart of what we're trying to do is to democratize finance as well. So just if you bear with me, I mean, again, I don't know how much you know about fintech. It's something really I live and breathe every day, but we do live in a bubble out in Canary Wharf. Has anyone ever heard of fintech before today? So we do have a few fintech aficionados. So interestingly, I work daily with the British press, which is by far the most cynical press on the face of the earth. And I'm constantly, on a regular basis, having to answer quite challenging questions. And the other day, I had someone from the FT talking about how he's disappointed in fintech, and mainly because he says fintech hasn't had their Amazon or Apple moment, something that's really innovative and cutting edge. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, quite frankly, the most successful fintech innovations that are taking place in the UK, but crucially in Southeast Asia, are not sophisticated at all. It's basically harnessing existing infrastructure that's already there in the region and really just working at a grassroots level to identify what people need and how they can easily access cash and, basically have, means to live their lives. So when Cameron went out in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned before, last year with his delegation, he decided that he would do a fintech whistle-stop tour around the region, and he spent quite a few days in Vietnam. So Vietnam has a very, very exciting fintech sector. It's booming in its own way. And interestingly as well, Vietnam produces more software engineers and developers every year than the UK does. So there is a lot of talent, local talent. And there's several fintech communities across Vietnam. There's one particular in the Ho Chi Minh and accelerator space. And they're producing innovations that basically are helping people finance, access cash through the mobile phone. So obviously that people must know this, that mobile has transformed the lives of many people. They may not have bank accounts, but let me tell you about 90% of the population in Southeast Asia has phones. So Vietnam, the big mobile fintech innovation that's taking the country by storm is something called Momo, which was the most downloaded app in Vietnam last year to the Apple Store. And it's just a mobile app that allows you to transfer money really simply from one mobile phone to the other. It doesn't have to be a smartphone. It can be a cheap Nokia phone to a text message. But that has been revolutionary for the people in Vietnam. Standard Chartered, which is a member of Innovate Finance as well, they've also collaborated with M Services, who is behind Momo, to create an innovation called Straight to Bank, which allows corporations and businesses to pay salaries directly into people's mobile wallet apps. So they don't necessarily need to have a bank account. They can get paid via their mobile phones. LoanV, which is something that I think could transform the lives of a lot of women. It's a peer-to-peer lending platform for personal loans in Vietnam. So I don't know if you know anything about Vietnam, but Vietnamese women are very entrepreneurial. There was a fantastic piece in The Guardian a couple of years ago talking about the Vietnamese $1 million women. You know, there are a lot of women that set up their own businesses, but the challenge is getting more women into business in places like Vietnam, so they don't have access to loans. But peer-to-peer platforms like LoanV are enabling women to get those much needed loans. And what I like about fintech as well is that you're putting humanity back into banking, because when you're trying to raise money for a loan and you're doing this through a peer-to-peer platform or a kickstarting platform, you have to tell your personal story in order to get the funding. And I find sometimes if the stories are compelling enough, the women are able to get the funding as quickly as possible. So that's something that's very exciting. The Vietnamese government is backing this, and they find it's going to be a very crucial element to their development in the future, and women are playing a part in that future as well. In Indonesia, we talked a bit about Indonesia, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in Indonesia, are working very closely with banks now because, again, there is a huge unbanked population in that country. We have about 50 million, to be precise, that don't have access to credit. And the banks now are working with the FCA to create branchless services. So they're going out to communities that have access to digital capabilities. So again, they have access to their mobile phones, but no access to banking, to provide them services and loans. And it's a project that's really taking off. With the backing of the government and the FCA, I do believe that they're going to be able to close the financial gap there. They've also started a program called Simple in the educational communities. So children as young as 10 are learning about financial literacy, which again is a really important part of understanding how finance works and empowering women as well at a young age. So the program encourages both boys and, crucially, girls as well, to open up bank accounts and to understand the importance of savings. And since this initiative was launched in just 4 months, over 400,000 bank accounts have been opened from students. And there's just another thing I just want to give an example of, again, of innovations that are taking place in Singapore. We're doing a lot of work in Singapore at the moment. We're hoping to open up an Innovate Finance office there with Standard Chartered next year. Singapore is a lot more sophisticated market, again, a major financial hub. So a lot of the fintech innovations that are taking place there are for traders and for those who are already connected to the financial services model. However, there is one innovation that a company called Nunomi has created, and it's an ATM-style machine for financially excluded. So again, they can go to these machines and do some loans, pay for some of the services and bills in a very easy, simplified way without having access to banking. And if I can just conclude, because I know I only have 1 minute, we focus a lot about the financially excluded, but Rachel had a very good point when she's talking about the minimum wage and depressed earnings. We have to also remember those who are gainfully employed, but are what we call the underbanked. So they may have access to bank accounts, but they are still being shortchanged by financial services. And a good example of this are the domestic workers. So domestic workers may only be able to send £20 back to, let's say, Manila or India, but if £6 of that £20 is being eaten up by transfer fees, if they're working in a remote part of the world, and then on top of that, they have to pay £6 to get to the nearest branch to transfer their funds, you're looking at a loss of anywhere between 12 and £16. So the family on the other end is only getting £4 of that 20 that they're trying to send. I mean, it sounds very dramatic, but I can assure you that the rates are excruciatingly high, and that's why the biggest innovation, I think, to really transform Southeast Asia and a lot of parts of the world is the mobile transfer, digital transfer platforms. So being able to send money through initiatives such as those from TransferWise or World Remit are two big players at the moment. They cut the transaction costs by over 70%. So that allows people in low-paid jobs and also high-paid jobs to send money at a more competitive rate. And that's really what fintech is all about. It's about nurturing those innovations, those services that are better for everyone, regardless if they're banked or underbanked. And certainly in a place like Southeast Asia, regions such as Southeast Asia, the opportunities are limitless for fintech, and we're only going to see it grow and grow, this phenomenal banking revolution, if you want to call it that. Thank you.
Oh, Georgia, I learned a great deal. Thank you very much. I now know what fintech stands for. I can even pronounce it properly. I think I've done the yesterday. And I was thinking back as I was listening to you, to Joel Sue's words that to facilitate women's economic dignity, you need the resources, you need the knowledge, you need the information, not to shortchange women. You know, and banking system, a system that is broken, that is discriminating, doesn't work. And to give us a sense of what alternatives that might be available, I think ties in very much in what that strategic forum is trying to do. And I think what we started with this panel, you know, we set off, I think, in a very important way by setting some of the fundamentals, noting the diversity, the complexity that we talk about, core concepts of economic development and how it links up with women's empowerment, inequality, that we are simply aware of the complexities that there are, in terms of the inequalities, the social, political, economic complexities, and what factors come into, we haven't even mentioned when we talk religion, ethnicity, caste, and etc., on the one hand. And on the other hand, and that is what Rashida did, also talk about the resources that there are, conventions, organizations, women's organizations, opportunities give that, but also and we need to talk about that more, what is needed to indeed utilize these particular opportunities, and which section of the population are missing out on that in important ways. And then the possibilities of fintech and that office, and that raises a lot of questions to me, and that is the point of contact. And having these, wonderful resources, these ideas and mechanisms, how within given country contexts and do you reach? Do you make that contact with women who need that information. How do you establish that particular conduit? There's so much there that we will take into our subsequent session. Now, may I overrun the session by about 5 minutes or so, because we started late. But I just want to give a brief opportunity for question clarification before I ask Phyllis, our rapporteur, to briefly summarize. Phyllis, would you like to do that because before you're running off?
I would prefer to do it at the beginning of the next session, because I must collect our keynote speaker.
Phyllis is multitasking. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, may I, then just a few minutes to give opportunities, questions, clarification, specifically relate to the presentations. Anyone here? Yes.
Yeah, just in relation to the FinTech presentation. I know that
Gloria, would you sort of,
Sorry,
just stand up. Absolutely, this is something formal. Yeah.
I've been looking into some trafficking issues and the use of technology for the cyber paedophilia in the Philippines has enabled the abuse of women by Western predators sending money to internet cafes in the Philippines to exploit children, and I was just wondering if there was any response from the industry to prevent that sort of negative or predatory use of the technology.
Absolutely, actually. There's a lot of behavioral analytics, technologies and innovations that have come about to address dodgy behavior, especially with transactions. And the biggest challenge, actually, for fintech sector to move forward is the issue of what we call KYCs, knowing your customer, whether you're trying to assess whether you can give them a loan, where you can enable them to transfer funds from one end to the other. And there are innovations that are taking place to help the industry, those who are trying to deliver these services, to have a better understanding in terms of who they're facilitating to send, borrow, etc. money. But it is a big challenge, and if you have a criminal mindset, you are going to find ways of getting what you want, whether you're tapping into digital innovations or using traditional banking. But interestingly, it's the banks themselves that are interested in investing in data analytics software, mainly because there was so much corruption and dodgy happenings internally. So we've got one company called BehaveVox, for example, that just works with institutions to identify problems such as labor rigging, insider trading. So the innovations are already in place to understand and track where people's money is going, and also any illicit activity that's taking place online. And you don't even actually need to use sophisticated software either, because I don't know if the police say that the biggest way to capture culprits, especially in those that are dealing in the sex trade and pedophilia, is through social media platforms. So you have fintech innovations that can help track behaviors, but you also have social media, and a lot of times the culprits themselves are incriminating themselves through their interactions on social media. But definitely behavioral analytics is probably the most invested form of fintech that we're seeing out there. A lot of people are interested.
In cooperation with law enforcement in the region.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, working very closely with them.
Thank you very much. Behavior analytics.
Yes, behavior analytics. Yes.
Sandra?
Yeah, I've got one question. That is actually with fintech as well.
Okay,
Also fintech.
That's a hot topic, I think.
And it is, we know East about.
Well, I mean, I do research. I have my PhD in finance and banking, and I did work for my telecommunication company in Bangladesh, which deals with microfinance.
Yeah.
So I feel that fintech relies so much on the existing technology and existing infrastructure, but especially in Southeast Asia, there is no right infrastructure in place. For example, the mobile banking, it relies on the telecommunication infrastructure. Also, it relies on the internet banking, for example. It's like another branch of fintech, which is not very advanced like peer-to-peer lending. The challenge that fintech will face in going to Southeast Asia is that there is no necessary infrastructure in existence. Are there any innovations that bypass all the requirements for the infrastructure?
Well, I think those innovations are going to come from the grassroots level. And interestingly, the reason why I'm so passionate about promoting diversity within our sector is because you need to have a diverse sector to respond to all the challenges that banking are facing at the moment. So you need to understand what's happening at that level. But I do know that the Gates Foundation, we work very closely with them, they're spending a lot of time and money and resources trying to understand and find solutions to that very problem. There's been a lot of hype around something called blockchain. I don't know if you know anything about blockchain. That is the technology that's underpinning Bitcoin. And all it is a visible ledger that allows you to record transactions that are taking place. And it's an open source platform. And it doesn't matter if the community doesn't have access to the internet. Banks, for example, or disruptors could very well provide some kind of support at a grassroots level through blockchain innovation, because they're able to record transactions through this new project. But that's something that I would like to discuss even further, maybe after the break, and I can do a bit more research and see what's happening for those areas that obviously don't have access to mobile communications. I know it's still very much a rural versus urban debate, and definitely fintech is going to benefit a lot of people that are working and living in urban areas. But the project that I mentioned to you in Indonesia, that's, actually I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but this project is with banks, and they are actually trying to create branchless institutions, and that's directly supposed to impact farmers and those working in rural areas, or people that do not have access to digital services. But the banks do; they can record that. But it's a matter of providing some support at that level, probably a ministry or a representative of the institution, to offer them loans and services that would otherwise elude them because they don't have access to traditional banking. But I can send you some more information.
Yeah, we can discuss it
later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger, thank you very much. Sabina?
Time for one more question.
Just one more.
Yes.
So we did.
For Rashida. With the ASEAN 2025, you talked about all the trade agreements. Is there anything that talks about women's empowerment or talks about the women's agenda at the ASEAN 2025 planning level?
Yes. Generally, whenever we talk about women empowerment within this agenda, it is usually being put within what is called the social cultural pillar. There are 3 pillars, but what we're trying to do is to make sure that it is not being put in a silo like that, because women empowerment, gender issues is just cross-cutting. So it is important that whenever new documents, governments are trying to negotiate a new document, what we try to do is to make sure that whether it's economic, whether it's political security, because they tend to think in only those 3 pillars. So you need to make sure it cuts across. Yes. And that is being done in many ways. In PWLD, even take it up at the Commission on the Status of Women, because in the agreed conclusion you have to do that. At the same time, through other NGOs such as the ASEAN Committee for the Women's Organization. This is another NGO which has a closer link to the different governments. So you need to know who are the operators that you have to befriend, or at least have an line in. Then it is possible to ensure sure that women's empowerment is given due consideration. Yes.
Networking is everything here. Jonita, will you forgive me if the questions people will have of you, if we bring that into the next panel and further discussions? Simply, I want to give everyone opportunity for a coffee break before the keynote. But first of all, please let me thank Jonita, Rashida, and Georgia for starting off the conversation with a great deal to think about, and some important ideas and concept questions that we'll bring into forthcoming session. Phyllis, at the next session, which will be at 1:30, Advancing Women in Innovation and Technology, because we have a keynote after the tea break. The next session, Phyllis will start the session with a kind of summary of this panel and the sense of her impression of what's happened. So first of all, a great thank you to the contributors and thank you to the audience. We're making wonderful start. And we see you at 1:30, the same